Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming in. Welcome. Hi, Sarah, Paranormal Chaplain. Good to see you again, buddy. It's been a wee while. So tonight we are joined by Mr. Mark Egerton. See, I got it right, Mark. I got it right, didn't I? See, I got it right. Thomas was going to be on the panel. He was going to be in the chat instead with some questions. And Sarah might be joining us in a wee while. The wee one's still up running about, so she's looking after her majesty. But tonight we've got Mark with us. Mark has been a paranormal investigator for about 40 years. He's also the author of the book, The Haunted History of Huntingdonshire. I hope I pronounced that right.
You did.
Yeah, that was not bad.
It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it?
It is a bit of a mouthful. When I first seen the book in that, I was like, how do you pronounce that, you know? Hi, Misty Dog. Thanks for coming in. So, see, Mark's been in the business for about 40 years, and he was trained by one of, if not the best, but I'll let Mark tell you who that was and a wee bit about himself. Whenever you're ready, Mark.
Yeah, well, basically, it all started for me in I'm 60 years old now, and it all started for me in 1976 when I was 15, when I saw my one and only ghost. I've never seen another one, or apparition, however you want to call it. And it was in broad daylight on a sunny afternoon in an old 16th century farmhouse. I came home excitedly and told my parents, who were very supportive, and they said to me, "Don't be so stupid, boy." Luckily, my mother had a sister called Marilyn, who was married to a guy called Trevor Kenwood. Trevor was a member of an organisation called the Ghost Club, which some people probably have heard of. It's the oldest psychical research organisation in the world. It was formed at Cambridge University in the 1850s and formally founded in 1862, and has had illustrious people like Charles Dickens, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And the guy who trained me was its president, I think from about 1960 until 1992, roughly, about 32 years. And that was a guy called Peter Underwood. Peter's probably not known to some of the younger people involved in the field, but Peter was the sort of daddy of the paranormal in the UK in the 20th century. He wrote about 60 books on the paranormal. And my uncle Trevor happened to be his cousin. And an interesting fact about Peter Underwood, what not many people know, is his name wasn't Peter. Peter was his middle name. He was actually called Alan, spelled A-L-L-A-N, and he hated it. And so he went under his middle name, which was Peter. So, yeah, fortunately, after this experience, my uncle and my mum's sister came to visit their mother, who lived in the village where I do in Cambridgeshire. It was Huntingdonshire then, and he basically interviewed me and believed me. And I was just fascinated with it, but I was only 15, so I wasn't able to participate. And the Ghost Club at then was a very select organisation. You had to be a Cambridge or Oxford educated person or a big celebrity, really. You couldn't join, you had to be invited. And I went to Huntingdon Grammar School, so I wasn't quite in the Cambridge or Oxford scenario. And that's really how it started. And when I was 18, I was 18 in February 1979, and I did my very first paranormal investigation on the 17th of March 1979. And the reason I know that, and it's in the book as well, Scott, is because it's an anniversary haunting. So it always happens on St. Patrick's Day, the 17th of March, allegedly. In the book, I've actually poo-pooed it. It's one of Huntingdonshire's oldest ghost stories, and I did a lot of research, and from my research and my own personal experience, I've actually think that it's more folklore than it is a real life haunting. And I've listed in my reasons why.
I was Mark very, very kindly posted me a copy of his book. That's it there. It's a beautiful book, over 300 pages, and it's full of beautiful photographs, illustrations, and tons of stories. Absolutely tons and tons of stories. And you got a good write-up from Robert Snow as well. I believe, Mark.
Robert Snow was the former General Secretary of the Ghost Club, and Robert obviously worked with my uncle. When my uncle died, Robert and I kept our relationship going. Robert sadly passed away about 6 months ago, but at the time I was writing the book, he was the very first person to read it. And as you can see from the inside cover, he'd probably read more books on the paranormal than any other person in the UK. So I thought he was a pretty good person to read it. And you can see on that page there that you had up, Scott, there's a grey book which was written by my uncle Trevor Kenwood and Robert together, and that's about Trevor's favourite. You'll like this. He used to go up to Scotland every year for about 4 to 6 weeks, and his passion was these ruined old Scottish castles on the coastline in the real Highlands of Scotland. He used to go up there 4 to 6 weeks at a time, sometimes with Robert, and they would do investigations. Very scientific, a very sceptical paranormal investigator, my uncle Trevor was. But he allowed me to do some research when I was younger, but I couldn't do an investigation until I was 18. And I think that's probably wise with the subject that you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, that's how it all started.
So you said, your parents kind of disbelieved you. I think that's quite a common thing, I think, because, also I've heard over the years a lot of young kids claim to have seen things in a room or the old imaginary friend kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there is a theory that it's not an imaginary friend, it is actually a spirit. It's never been proved, it is simply a theory. I've done it with my own kids come in and say, I've got an imaginary friend called Peter,
Yeah. Well, there's in my book, in the Huntingdon chapter, there's a chapter on something called the True Blue Cottage, and the True Blue Cottage has got an example of that, where there's young children and they're seeing something, and when they talk about it through their growing up there, and when they turn 16 or 17, they say we didn't hear any of it after that. We didn't hear any more of it. It's also got a newspaper article with it where somebody actually turns around and says, I think I know who the ghost was. It was my father. And the description that this woman has given of the ghost is a really accurate description. He had cerebral palsy and a withered arm, smell of some pipes, tobacco. He had a thin, narrow face. And this woman actually wrote into the newspaper and said, we used to live in that house, and that's an exact description of my father. And there's a big newspaper story, and it's printed in the book. I got the newspaper story from the Huntingdon Library archives, and there's a picture of it in the book, and that I think goes back to 1986 that happened.
So I did that. John's saying of an orphanage in Liverpool which is haunted. Don't know if you've heard of it. Newsham Park, it's old Seamen's orphanage.
Yes, I have heard of it, and the reason I've heard of it is I've got very strong links with Liverpool. My father came from Liverpool, and if I flash my tattoo, if you can see it, I'm a big Liverpool fan. All my family grew up there. Half of them are buried in Anfield Cemetery, so I'm quite familiar with the Liverpool area and some of the hauntings. Nothing like as familiar with them as I am of Huntingdonshire. When I bought the book out, I decided to start a Facebook group named after the book's title, The Haunted History of Huntingdonshire. And I started writing in there like little blogs of sort of 300 to 500 words. And as with the book, I include lots of photographs. People seem to really like it and said, why don't you do this on a national basis and cover the whole country? And I have investigated all over the country. And so I decided to start another group, which is called Haunted History. And between the two groups, there's about 8,000 people following them now. So I must be doing something right. But I don't write any sort of main claims. I just normally write a little bit of the history of the property and then a history of the hauntings that are reported there, and back that up with lots of pictures. And people seem to like it.
As I've had a look at both I've been through both the pages, and they are really interesting, folks. We'll put the links up on our Facebook page after the live for you to go I definitely recommend go and have a look at them. The Haunted History one features London. It features our favourite place, Edinburgh. You know, I noticed that right away. Features Edinburgh, and there's tons and tons of information, photographs, everything on there, and it is all genuine stuff. I'm not saying the other pages aren't genuine, but it is all genuine stuff. So your book, Mark, there was a special reason you wrote the book.
Yes, right? Yeah. I don't consider myself to be an author, although people are telling me you definitely are. The book is now, considering it's an expensive book, and the reason it's expensive is because it's got so many photos in it. It's got 300, and nearly all of them are colour. And so you probably might notice when people have a book and they have photos in it, the photos are all stacked together in the middle of the book. And that's because they have to be printed on very expensive paper. They can't print normal photos on the sort of pulpy stuff that the print is written on, because of what they call dot gain. It blots it and distorts the image. So the whole book had to be printed on sort of very high grade paper, and it comes out at $24.99. It's A4 in size. It's, I think, 332 pages, and it's 108,000 words, and there's 300 images in there and illustrations. So it wasn't a cheap book, and I think it's sold now it's nearly, with the it sells on Amazon as a Kindle, but because of demand from around the world, I'm going to put it on Amazon as a hardback. The reason I didn't put it on Amazon originally was because Amazon wanted so much money from me to do it. They were going to pay me 15 quid for the book, and it was costing 17 quid to print. And so I said, I want people to read it, but I'm not going to pay people to read it. And so now, because the book is more, has become more popular, I can have longer print runs done, and that brings down the price of the book per copy. So I can now put it on Amazon, let them take their 40%, and, you know, I'm not making a loss. I didn't write it to make money, Scott. The reason I wrote it, to answer your question honestly, was because my aunt, she had no children of her own. She was my mother's only sister. I'm an only child. So my aunt and I were pretty close. And she passed away from cancer in 2009. And she lived at Verwood in Dorset. And we had a number of very long, emotional phone calls. And she had been badgering me for 15, 20 years to write a book. She said, Mark, you know so much about Huntingdonshire. No one has ever written a book about Huntingdonshire. And to just go back a step, Huntingdonshire was once a county in its own right. It's a small county. In 1974, it got absorbed into Cambridgeshire, and it's now a district of Cambridgeshire. So we're now in Cambridgeshire as opposed to Huntingdonshire. But Huntingdonshire still exists as a district, and the reason it kept its county name was because of its historical interest. Oliver Cromwell was born here in Huntingdonshire. Catherine of Aragon died here in Huntingdonshire, Henry VIII's first wife. And also the famous London diarist Samuel Pepys spent a great deal of his life living in Huntingdonshire, learning in Huntingdonshire. He went to the same school as Oliver Cromwell. And also he worked in Huntingdonshire because he became Secretary of the Admiralty. And the guy who owned Hinchinbrook House at that time was the Montague family, or to use his title, the Earl of Sandwich. And he basically employed him as his naval, he was Lord of the Admiralty, and he needed a competent naval secretary. And Pepys is famous because of his attention to detail. He only wrote a diary for 9 years, but the things that happened in those 9 years are of such historical significance. I'm talking about the Dutch invading London. I'm talking about the Great Plague, and I'm talking about the Great Fire of London. And Pepys recorded those in such detail at a time when most people couldn't read or write, that they remain today the most prized sort of record of those events in English history. So the original diaries now are stored in Cambridge University, where he was educated, and they remain the most accurate and detailed data that exists for those very historical national events.
and of course non-paranormal related, but that's how the signage came about as well. I remember.
Well, yeah, when I started researching the stories, I started to find some really interesting details, and I think I mentioned one to you the other night that I always use as an example. Just a mile north from me, where I'm sitting now, is a little village called Diddington. It's the smallest parish in the whole of Cambridgeshire, and Cambridgeshire is a big county. I think in the Second World War it had a population of 81, so very small. But in the Second World War there was a military hospital there. It was an American military hospital, and it looked after airmen mainly, or air crew that had been injured in sorties over occupied Europe. And it had 1,000 beds, and it had 2 operating theatres, and it had its own cinema, and it also had a very interesting ghost story attached to it, which is in my book as Airman Mikey. Now, when I started doing the research to dig into it, I knew the ghost story backwards because my grandfather had told me it in the 1970s. But when I did the research, I found out that at this huge hospital, if you went there today, Diddington, you blink, you'd miss it. It's right on the A1 dual carriageway, the Great North Road. But if you went there today, you wouldn't believe that there was a 1,000-bed hospital there. All there is a sort of monument in a field marking that the hospital was there. But when I dug into the research, I found out that Bob Hope and Bing Crosby had performed there. They'd gone there to entertain the single. I mean, Bing Crosby's like White Christmas, his biggest selling single in the world. And, you know, he'd been a mile up the road from me. I was sort of blown back by that. And then the hospital was only there for about 10 months. And then after 10 months, it became a Polish refugee camp. And I discovered that the actress Rula Lenska, who's in Coronation Street, was actually born in one of these Nissen huts that were hospital wards at one time and had since now become a Polish refugee camp. So, yeah, Rula Lenska was born a mile up the road from me as well. And I thought, God, I've lived here all my life. I didn't know that. So fair bet that the other people in Huntingdonshire don't know it either. So I could weave that into the book as a bit historical fact, but linked to the ghost story. And there's ghost stories about Catherine of Aragon, about Oliver Cromwell and Samuel Pepys in the book that are linked to the area. Whether they're true or not, I won't say too much because it'll spoil your enjoyment if you read the book. But I went into them in great detail, and I've given my verdict as to what I think. I've based the book as I would a paranormal investigation. I look at all the evidence, I eliminate things based on the facts that I have, and what you're left with then is possibly the truth. And that's some things you'll never know. They'll never know how Catherine of Aragon died. Some people think that she was poisoned by Henry VIII. She had a blackened heart. Some people think that she just succumbed to the Fenland climate. Other people think she had some form of cancer. That's the most popular, that she had a cancer. But she died at Kimbolton Castle, which is about 12 miles to the west of me. She died on the 7th of January 1536. She's buried at Peterborough Cathedral, which is about 25 miles north of me. But nobody really knows the cause of death still. She's supposed to haunt Kimbolton Castle, which is a magnificent building. It's now a very high profile public school, so they're not too keen on letting people know that it's haunted, because they have Arab princes there who pay something like 15 grand a term, so they don't want ghosts or stuff there, so they're not keen. They wouldn't allow me to spend the night in there, but they did allow me to write the story as long as I wrote about historical sightings and not recent ones. And I had a very good recent one, but I had to abide with their wishes and leave that out.
I could obviously, a big show with that is usually like 15 grand a term and what have you. The last thing they want is somebody, thinking I'm not sending my son there because it's riddled with ghosts and, whatever. I mean,
none of the, although it's a boarding school, none of the actual kids, they do their lessons in the old castle. They don't actually sleep in there anymore. So even if they're a boarder, the house is empty at night. So it would be quite easy to do a paranormal investigation, but they don't like it to be linked. It was also said to be haunted by a gentleman called Judge John Popham. I don't know if you've heard of him.
No.
He was a very powerful judge, and he was the judge who resided at the trials of Sir Walter Raleigh and also Guy Fawkes. He was the judge who sat and judged the case, and he's supposed to haunt there as well. He apparently killed one of his own children, a baby, flung it from the window, an upper window, onto the central courtyard in a fit of rage over whatever. And that's supposed to, the baby is supposed to be an anniversary haunting there too. Although I could find little to back that up other than folklore. I couldn't find anybody who had actually witnessed the stone that the baby landed on and allegedly killed on impact. Is supposed to, on the anniversary of the baby's death, glow. In some accounts it glows blue, in some accounts it glows red. But I couldn't find anyone who's actually witnessed that themselves.
Well, just talk about anniversary hauntings. What's your theory in anniversary hauntings? I mean, I know there's a famous one, Hampton Court Palace, Jane Seymour is set to climb the Queen's Staircase on the anniversary of Edward's
with the
death.
silver candle. With the silver candle in it. Yeah.
Every year.
Well, there are certainly enough of them around to suggest that they may well be genuine. There is one in my book, as I said, in the Holywell-Come Needingworth chapter, a place called the Ferry Boat Inn, which is probably the oldest ghost story in Huntingdonshire. It goes back to the 12th century, and it relates to a pub called the Ferry Boat Inn. And in the pub, there is an actual gravestone. And the story is that this girl called Juliet Tousley, she fell in love with a woodcutter called Thomas Zool, who I think was probably married, but very handsome and a bit of a lad. And she fell madly in love with him and made her intentions towards him known. And he totally rebuffed her and sort of said, "You think I'd be interested in you?" You know. And she was so distraught, she took herself to the edge of the River Ouse, which is near the pub, and hanged herself from a tree. Now, in those days, we're talking 12th century, if you took your own life, you weren't allowed to be buried in a church in consecrated ground. So she was buried by the river. It was a sort of crossing point on the river where it was rather shallow, and she was buried nearby. Later, the ferry was there, and then this inn developed called the Ferry Boat Inn, and the inn was built on top of her gravesite. But they've still retained her grave and marked it out of respect. This is the story. And this happened on the 17th of March. And apparently on the 17th of March, this is going back to, I first became aware of it, as I said, I did an investigation on the 17th of March 1979. I was just turned 18. I was 18 in a month. And I went there was a load of people there gathered because Juliet was supposed to rise up from her tomb on this day and walk across the bar, out through the wall and down to the river, to the tree where she hanged herself. And I did a lot of investigation, and I found that most of the facts that I've just told you there were not facts. They came from a seance conducted there in the 1950s, 1953, I think, by a very famous paranormal investigator called Tony Cornell, who appears in the book. And they did a seance there, and all that information came from the seance. And this was the days when pubs used to shut at 11. So they were halfway through this seance, and the landlord said, "Hey, it's 11 o'clock, pubs are shutting." So they asked the ghost if they could continue with the seance in a hotel in Cambridge, which is about 18 miles away, called the Blue Boar. And Juliet apparently said that she would continue the seance with them. And they went back to the Blue Boar, and the night porter there bought them copious amounts of coffee, and they carried on the seance. So all these things, like the dates she died, I found the transcripts of those that seance in Huntingdon Library, and they're printed in full in the book. So if you go to the book, to the Holywell Needingworth page, you will see the full transcript of that seance. And Tony Cornell then investigated historically, and I must have been there in the last 40 odd years. On the 17th of March, I must have been there at least 15 times. I've never seen anything. I've never found anybody who has seen anything or says they've seen anything. And so I think that that is basically a case where folklore, pubs and hotels are notorious. If they've got a ghost, it attracts people. So when I get called to a pub or hotel and the landlord tells me he has Oliver Cromwell in for a pint on a Thursday, and you know, Dick Turpin drops in on a Saturday evening, I'm a bit sceptical, to say the least. So these places like to have a ghost because it attracts custom.
That's it, exactly. You know, as you say, pubs, hotels, places like that. If they think, you know, they can get, you know, maybe make a coin or two by saying they've got a ghost, they know people are going to come. Teams are going to come, they're going to pay whatever, you know, X amount of pounds to do investigations, and it's a good way. Unfortunately, it makes a kind of mockery of the person that they're saying is, you know, like that young girl. They're kind of using her memory to make money, you know, in a way.
That's if she even existed. I mean, Tony Cornell makes a big note that when you do a seance, very often what you can get is complete gobbledygook. I'm sure if you've ever, I don't actually work with a Ouija board. I don't like Ouija boards, not because I'm worried about them or frightened of the reputation they have. I do a form of dowsing, but I just use a glass, and I have a Ouija board, but it's a set of cards. So I just use the glass first of all. If the glass is moving around, I will then put a yes card and a no card and ask questions that solicit a yes or a no answer. If that's going really well, then I want to find more information. I will lay the other cards around it in a circle, A, B, C, D, and that's how I work. Now, the beauty of that is if you do receive anything that's unpleasant, and I must admit in my 40 years, I could probably count on one hand the amount of times I've encountered something that the Americans would regard as demonic. I've not really had any dealings. I've dealt with things that are not pleasant, but not demonic. Now, if you use a Ouija board, you've got a circle of cards, and you encounter something like that. Peter Underwood and Trevor taught me that what you must do is not encourage that thing in. You must tell it that it's not wanted, to go away, pick up your stuff and leave. Now, if you've got a Ouija board and you fold it in half, that circle is still there. So the theory is that you could still carry that entity with you and take it with you. Where with my pack of cards, I can just scramble them up with my hands, circles broken, scoop them up, out. And so I should really patent those cards because they are pretty unique. I haven't seen many other paranormal investigators who've got them. They're actually behind me under my bed. I can show you them if you want to see them.
That'd be good,
Just bear with me a moment.
Right. If anybody's got any questions for Mark, feel free to pop them in the chat. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to try and answer them.
Right, I don't know if you can see this, but this is my standard box of tricks which I carry around. It's quite small. Some of that you'll recognise. And this laser grids and things, this is my Ouija board. So you'll see there's the no card there. So if I'm working with a glass and the glass is moving around, I'll put the no and the yes cards out. See that? And you can then ask questions that solicit a yes or a no. You can't ask questions that don't have a yes or no answer because obviously they can't communicate with you. If it's going really well, then I will put the other cards around A, B, C, D and the numbers, and we can start to get years and names and things like that. Sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't. And if it does work well, we have a scribe recording what we pick up. And then after the investigation at a later date, we do historical research using various sort of, you can get these sites now where you can search names from the past. I've got a lady called Kate who happens to be very good at dowsing with a crystal. And Kate also does a lot of the research for me, ancestral research, where you can go back and check things from the past and check if the information you've received is accurate. And sometimes, you know, we go into a place, the one I mentioned to you, my favourite one in the book is the Cromwell Museum in Huntingdon. It used to be Huntingdon Grammar School. It was where Oliver Cromwell and Samuel Pepys were educated. I did an investigation in there and we got loads of information, and because we weren't allowed to go in there alone because there's artifacts in there that are priceless to the nation, Oliver Cromwell's hat and things like that, we had to have a curator with us. And we were telling him all this information and asking him questions. He was saying, no, nothing like that here, nothing like that here. So we left feeling fairly disappointed. He then contacted me a week later and said, the name you said, John Lambert, is significant. It was Cromwell's right-hand general. And this spirit, or whatever we were communicating with, said he knew Cromwell well. He gave us a lot of information about being married, how many children he had, that he told us there was something in the museum that belonged to him. So we turned to the curator and said, we were basically saying, is it this painting on the wall? No, no, no. So we turned to the curator and said, do you know this name, John Lambert? He's saying there's something in here that belongs to him. He said, no, no, no. Well, there was something in there that belonged to him. He became a politician after the Civil War, and he became a threat to Cromwell. And so Cromwell basically sacked him, and he wrote him a letter. And that letter, tiny little letter folded up in a corner of the museum that you wouldn't even notice, because you've got, it's not too far away from Cromwell's death mask. So if you went there, you'd be sort of intrigued by the death mask. You probably wouldn't even notice it. Even the curator didn't realize it was there. And, you know, it all checked out. The only thing that didn't check out is he told us he got 12 children, and we could only historically from websites and these ancestral websites find 11. So whether he had one out of wedlock or secretly or whatever, which would have happened at the time, there was no contraception. Everything else was spot on what he told us. He told us he came from Yorkshire. He told us he was married. He told us he knew Cromwell well, and that he didn't live locally to Huntingdon, and that there was something in the museum that belonged to him, and there was. So I really like that one, because this curator was present and he witnessed all this too, and he was telling us, no, it's rubbish, and he's supposed to be the expert. So I really, that's my favourite investigation. Not because it's particularly spectacular of what happened, but the evidence that we got, and there was an independent witness there to see that we got it too. So I really liked that one. But with a lot of the investigations that are in the book, you'll see, I'm really honest. I say, look, we had high expectations, but unfortunately, Scott, nothing happened. You know, nothing that I could deem as paranormal. It's just the way it is. You know, the fishing scenario that we spoke about earlier. Sometimes you can go to the river and catch loads of fish, go there the next day, same time, same place, you don't get a bite. And it's very similar with this.
It's very true. As I say to you, Mark, about Greatfriars, you know, it's our favourite location, and we do go there a lot. But we've done some investigations. We've done the investigations before we actually found out that they're now banned. They've been banned for quite some time. Obviously, we weren't aware of that. But and well, as I said, everybody goes to Greatfriars, the most haunted graveyard in the world. They're expecting to get something, and we've been there. I don't know how many, maybe Sarah can tell us, I don't know. And we've had nothing. You know, I picked up in a mail one night, we were there, and it was very brief, and that was it. But, you know, there was, Sarah felt it as well. I felt it, but that was it. There was nothing to back it up, nothing to say. But that's what happens, as we said, it's what fishing. You can go to the same spot over and over again and get nothing. But then you get these things that they go every time and they get something, or they'll hear something through an app and they'll make it up.
This is what makes me giggle about these paranormal TV shows. Every episode, something fantastic happens. As you know, I filmed an episode of Paranormal Lockdown a couple of years ago in Hinchinbrook House here in Huntingdon. And very nice people like Nick Groff and Katrina and the crew and everything else, but they conduct the investigations by themselves, or they're supposed to, just the two of them. And they discovered more there in 3 days than I've discovered in 40 years. So you can draw your own conclusions from that. I certainly did. I certainly believe Hinchinbrook House is haunted, but some of the stuff that they encountered, they were using various electronic devices where they were speaking to spirits, and these spirits are speaking, you know, English country house, speaking with an American accent. Sounds a bit, doesn't seem right to me. That's just my opinion. I can only go by what they say, but you know, and also as well, if you're using an electronic device these days, I was quite a fan of the EMF meters, probably 20, 25 years ago when they first came out. But since then, we've had Wi-Fi, we've had mobile phones, we've got radio signals everywhere, and all of these devices have electronic receivers in them. So, you know, you could get the local cabbie down the road ringing back to his base. If that signal passes through the building, something like a REM pod could pick it up. An EMF meter certainly would, if it happens to pass in that direction. So they do have a place, I think. If you are communicating with something and it's communicating intelligently for you, then you can, if that goes on for a minute or more, I think you can dismiss the possibility that it's just a rogue signal from somebody's mobile. I've seen people, I've done it myself with, I put my phone on airplane mode, and I put it near an EMF meter, and the EMF meter still registers. Now it shouldn't be able to do that, because when it's on airplane mode, it's not emitting or receiving any signals. But I've seen it myself, and I demonstrated that to Nick Groff at Hinchinbrook House. I can see a question from Sarah that's popped up, asking about Hinchinbrook House.
The history.
The history. How long have you got? It goes back about 800 years. I'm actually going to be doing some walks around it in August and September for the Huntingdonshire History Festival, where I'll be taking people into the house. I'll be telling them its history. I'll be telling them its haunted history, and then I'll be taking them around the house, the grounds where this white lady that appears on the front of my book is said to appear. And nearby there's another ghost story. There's a bridge called Nuns Bridge, and that's because the house was once a priory. To answer Sarah's questions as quickly as I could, and literally I could spend an hour talking on this, Hinchinbrook started life as a dilapidated wooden church in the 12th century. It was falling to pieces. There was a nearby priory in a little village whose name escapes me. It'll come back to me in a second. And they asked if they could build a priory there, and they were given permission. And this priory was erected around about 1170, so late 12th century. And it remained a priory until Henry VIII fell out with the Pope, because he wouldn't give him a divorce from Catherine of Aragon. And he decided to dissolve all the monasteries. So all these wonderful priories, abbeys, buildings, that Henry started his own religion, the Church of England, and the Catholic faith, which was largely followed, was dissolved. And basically, because he was the king and he wanted to do what he wanted, he was king, so why shouldn't he? And that was his attitude. So these beautiful priories, and you can still see evidence of the priory at Hinchinbrook. There are still some places where you can see it. All became prime real estate, and it was in fact the Cromwell family. Well, that's not strictly true. A guy called Richard Williams bought it from King Henry VIII, and he paid about 19 quid. This was around about the time of Catherine of Aragon's death. Now, this was not just the house, it was the estate too. Now that estate has got a large police headquarters on it. It's got Hinchinbrook Hospital. It's got a mammoth country park. And then the house itself is now a school. But this guy called Richard Williams bought it. But Williams was a Welsh name, and Cromwell was quite a well-renowned name in Huntingdonshire. And he was also a relative of Thomas Cromwell, who was one of Henry VIII's advisors. So he changed his name by what we would call deed poll to Cromwell. And so it was the Cromwells that first bought the house. Now you'll be interested in this, entertained King James I there a lot. When he came from Scotland to collect the throne in London, he stopped at Hinchinbrook, and he fell in love with the hunting there. The hunting was so good, he returned many, many times and stayed at Hinchinbrook. And as a result, the Cromwells, lavishly entertaining him, went broke and run out of money. And they then sold it to a family called the Montague family, who, after about 60 years of being there, they were an up-and-coming family. They acquired the title, the Earl of Sandwich. That was after Sandwich in Kent. And they basically got the Sandwich, the title. And the fourth Earl of Sandwich was a guy called John Montague. He was the most entertaining. He was Lord of the Admiralty at one time. and he's the guy who's supposed to have invented the sarnie, what we eat, the sandwich. That's why it's called a sandwich. He was a gambler, and he wouldn't leave the poker table. 24 hours he sat there playing poker, and they said to him, "Oh, you must eat, you must eat." And he said, "Bring me meat between two slices of bread." And that, they think, is how the sandwich was first. He invented the sandwich. He was quite a nasty. He had a nasty side to him as well. He sponsored all the voyages of Captain James Cook, and what you now call the Hawaiian Islands. If you look them up, you'll see that they were originally christened the Hinchinbrook Isles after his sponsor, which was this John Montague. He also named an island off the west coast of Australia, Hinchinbrook, but he didn't put the E on the end of it for some reason. It's spelt without the E. Hinchinbrook, the brook has got an E after the K, but he didn't on that. The Montagues were there 9 generations, so there was 9 Earls of Sandwich at Hinchinbrook, and they too ran out of money in around 1962-63. They sold the property and the estate to Huntingdon District Council, and that happened in the early 60s. The house was in a bit of a state. The council then decided to build a police headquarters on the estate. They built Hinchinbrook Hospital, which is a huge hospital, and there's a huge country park, and the house itself had a school developed behind it, and that was Huntingdon Grammar School at one time, but in the early 70s it changed to a comprehensive school, and that's where I went to school, which is why I know so much about it. One of my best friends at school, his dad was a caretaker, so they lived in a bungalow adjoined to the school. It's now the security office, but there was an on-site caretaker, which was this guy called Ted Rendell, and Craig, his son, and I were best friends. So it meant that in the summer holidays, we had the run of the school, the swimming pool, squash courts, and obviously the house. So I'd been in the attics of the house, the cellar, and all the places that they showed on Paranormal Lockdown when I was 15, 16 in the 70s. So I do know the skeletons that are under the stairs there. This is a game where Paranormal Lockdown twisted the story slightly. They made out that it was a monk buried under the stairs and a pregnant nun. That is unlikely, and I told them this on the walk around, but they decided not to screen it. The bones were sent away for analysis in 2014, and they were found to be a man and a woman of around 50, a woman of around 30, and the bones were found to be 100 years older than the Priory, roughly. So the Priory was 1170, these bones were 1070. They're also in very ornate stone hand-carved coffins, and the teeth of the skeletons are in remarkable condition for a 12th century person. So the experts at Cambridge believe that they were very wealthy people, certainly not a monk and a nun. But Paranormal Lockdown linked it into the poltergeist, the Black Monk from Pontefract, and Nick Groff thought at one stage that the Black Monk had followed him there, and you'll see Nick Groff crawling around in the cellars where the underground spring is and saying, "Are you a monk? Are you a monk?" And I think, you know, I think that was, you know, these programs, they're not dishonest as such, but they're for entertainment, so that, you know as well as I do, Scott, that when you go to some investigations, nothing happens at all. Now that doesn't make great TV. So, no. You know, they're entertaining, but, you know, you have to take them with a little bit of tongue in cheek. You'll see from reading my book that if nothing happens, that's what's in the book. If something great happens, that's in the book as well, but it's honest.
That's it. That's spot on, Mark. You know, as you just nailed, you know, excuse me, just had the nail on the head, as they say. You have to be honest. If you don't get anything, as you say, you need to say, we've got nothing. You know, we've been here 8 hours, and we've not even had a branch snap or whatever, you know, anything at all. You do get these things, you say, they go out for entertainment.
As I said to you earlier, Scott, I've been doing this now since 1979. That was when I did my first investigation. So I've done a lot of investigations all over the country. I would say, these are figures I've just plucked off the top of my head, that 50% of the time nothing happens at all. 45% of the time what happens could possibly be paranormal, but there is also a possible logical explanation. No matter how, getting back to Peter Underwood and my uncle Trevor. My uncle Trevor was Peter Underwood's cousin. So I was privileged to meet Peter on 2 occasions and able to ask him a lot of questions, which I'm sure a lot of people would have liked to ask someone of Peter Underwood's stature. Underwood was probably most famous for the work he did after Harry Price on Borley Rectory. And I actually had a photocopy. I haven't got it now because I went through a divorce in 2006, and it was sort of, but I actually had a photocopy of Harry Price's original penciled notes from the Borley Rectory investigations. Unfortunately, I think they went in the tip, but because we got divorced, and you know what happens in these cases, you have this, you have that, and that's how it went. And yeah, Underwood, I remember saying to him, Peter, I was 18, 19 at the time, I said, Peter, what's the most important thing you should take with you on your investigation? And he said to me, Mark, that's quite easy. He said, people you can trust. He said, you need to have people with you that you can trust with your life. And he said, because you'll get people in this field that for whatever reasons, whether it be making money or purely their own ego, will tell you things that aren't true. When you get called to a house and people say it's highly haunted and something happens every night, the possibility of that is very low. So immediately you're sort of, is this really true? If you have a medium, and I have to say, you know, I've met some mediums who have been outstanding, but they probably make up 10% of the amount of mediums I've met. The other ones, you know, you have to take with a pinch of salt. There's only one medium that I will go to for a reading myself. I hadn't had a reading since I was a teenager, and just before this book came out, about a year or so, I went to see a particular lady, and what she told me was absolutely outstanding. She couldn't have possibly known any of it, and you know, that sold me, because I went there, I removed rings from my fingers. She could have looked at my Facebook account, but there wasn't anything on there that would tell her that much about me. I was writing the book at the time, but nobody knew that, only my immediate close family. She did. She said that she'd got my mother standing next to her, and she told me things about my mother which she couldn't have possibly known. She told me my mother was standing next to her and her hands were like that, like claws. My mother was a typist for 38 years, and she suffered extremely badly from arthritis, and in her last 5-10 years of her life she had arthritis so badly her hands were like that. And she told me other things as well that were, you know, I was quite flabbergasted. And I've actually still, she tapes her readings with you, and so, you know, I had a CD and I could listen to it afterwards, a 45-minute reading, and it was astounding. But I've been to others or asked other mediums questions, and some of their answers, I mean, a medium can tell you that they see spirit everywhere. There's a spirit boy standing next to you, Mark. Well, I say, okay, let him rattle my trouser leg, let him tug on my trousers, let him move that glass on the table. I need to see some evidence, because basically, if I've only got your word for it, that's not sufficient. You know, it's not conclusive.
Well, anybody can say, you know, somebody there or something. I mean, I know you're talking, Mark, with that woman. She was spot on. Mr. Cat's asking that the lady's name. She's talking about the medium. What was her name?
Her name was June Allman. She lives in a place called Bluntisham, which is near St Ives. I've had 2 readings with her. She's very honest. She will only project about 3 years forward if you go there for a reading. If there's anybody you want to talk to from your past, someone who's died, she will actually ask you and try to communicate with them. I didn't want to give her any clues when I went for the first time, because I was hugely skeptical. So I removed any rings from my fingers, anything that might give clues about me. I've got a slightly disabled foot, as you know, Scott, and I even made an effort not to limp slightly on it so that she wouldn't pick up on that. She recorded the reading on a CD, burnt the CD and gave it to me to take away. She said, Mark, I'll have told you lots of things in the last 45 minutes. When you get out of this room, some of them you'll remember, some of them you won't. Refer back to this disc, and then you can tell me, you know, whether it's right or not. And it was spot on. I don't think there was anything she told me that was inaccurate. So that impressed me, because there were things she told me she couldn't have possibly known. But I've dealt with others who, to be quite honest, they're I think you can actually get. I saw Derek Akora once at Hinchinbrook, Performing Arts Centre, and I thought he was awful, to be honest. I mean, he's dead now, so I shouldn't really speak ill of the dead. He'll probably come and haunt me. But a lot of it was. Give you an example. I had a lady sitting next to me. Now, she was a rather large lady. I would say she was size 24 at least. Big lady. Now, he stood on the stage and sort of pointed vaguely in her direction and said that he'd got this man there, and he described him. Does anyone recognize this? She put her hand up and he said, I think it's your grandfather. Is that right? She said, oh, yes, it is. She said, oh, he's speaking to me. Oh, he's telling me you like chocolate. Well, the lady's huge. It's probably a good gamble that she likes chocolate. I mean, I don't mean disrespectful to the lady, but that's probably a good educated guess.
It's.
Yeah.
I would say
not only that, he said, he's telling me you're not satisfied with a couple of squares. You eat the whole bar. And poor girl was in tears. And I thought, this is about, I don't like this. This is dealing with people's emotions, and it's basically you're fishing for information, and when you see a bite, you're expanding on it and making people believe something that isn't.
Exactly. I went to see him. A friend of mine years and years ago at the Royal Concert Hall in Glasgow. I went with one of the guys that worked with his wife, and we went to see him, and he was on for maybe an hour, I don't know how some of that wasn't very long, but he got everything wrong. The whole night, everything was wrong. And he was over, he was going to different parts of the hall, and people were saying, no, I can't take that. I don't know anybody of that name.
Well, I've got something good to say about him. He once played for Liverpool Football Club. So that's something that obviously my father and all his family came from Liverpool, so football's a big thing there, and I was brought up to. I didn't have a choice at what team I followed, and so Derek Akora actually was on Liverpool Football Club's books at one stage as a footballer.
All right, I'm not a footballer. I'm a Formula One man.
I saw the Ferrari on your arm.
My tattoo. But just to buy what you were saying about that woman, the medium. I had an identical experience of many years ago now. I was a place in Glasgow, a spiritualist church in Glasgow, and it was one, and I still remember it as if it was yesterday. I've told Sarah and a few people this story, and I'd been to a couple of the spiritualist churches, and I went to the main one in Glasgow. But this one particular night, I decided to go to one that was a totally different part of the town. It was like miles away, and it was a spur of the moment thing. I'd never been before. Nobody knew me. I jumped in the car and went, and I was sitting there. And there was a woman came on, must have been in her maybe mid-50s, and she came straight to me, and she says, you've got a daughter in the spirit world called Donna, and she's been sitting on your knees since she came in. Well, I lost a daughter called Donna when she was just under 6 months. That's, I guess, a tattoo there. That's a D.
Yeah.
The woman was bang on. And then she would only tell me about an ex-girlfriend who'd been killed in America in a car crash. She told me her name, and she told me, what happened.
Yeah.
And it was true. And, this was years before I went to see this woman. She told me about my gran. Just what you're saying about, your mum with the fingers. The woman said, I've got a elderly lady here. And so that many times it could be anybody. She's giving you roses, but she's going like this, down at her waist. She's going like that constantly. She says you'll recognise her with doing that. And my gran, she used to wear one of the old-fashioned aprons, just around your waist. But the size of her, the tyres, they kind of wrapped around her twist, because she was tiny. And she was forever tying and untying them constantly. And it used to drive me and my older brother nuts. He used to gran, going to just leave your, even if she was sitting watching She was saying what she was a big wrestling fan. I don't know if you remember, like say Mick McManus and stuff like that.
Right, yeah. Giant haystack and all that lot. Yeah,
Aye.
I'm of that age.
My gran loved it. Every week, every Saturday, she was, she'd start off at one end of the couch and she'd end up at the other end with just shouting at the TV. But even during the wrestling, she was tying this apron and untied when she was shouting at Mick McManus and stuff like that. And this woman says, you'll recognise her with doing this. She's doing this for me. And
I've met a few that are incredible. I certainly believe that there are mediums, but I would say, again, this is only based on been in this field for 40 plus years. I would say probably 10% of them are, have something. The other 90% are either in it to make money. Big Daddy's come up there, giant haystack, we're in them all. Yeah, I used to watch wrestling on a Saturday afternoon on World of Sport or whatever it was with Dickie Davis and whoever. But I would say that a lot of them are in it for money. And some of them are not in it for money. They like the ego of thinking that they know something about you and that they've got a talent that you haven't got. It sort of massages their ego. And I don't know if you saw on Most Haunted when Derek Acora got exposed by Dr. Kieran O'Keefe. He fed him a South African name that basically was an anagram of Derek is a fraud or something. And he knew that Derek was in the next room and listening to him talking about this supposed ghost. So, and of course, in the filming, Derek went into a South African accent and came up with this Kaffir or whatever it was.
It was an anagram of Derek Acora. I can't remember the actual book. It was Kaffir. It was an anagram of Derek's name.
Yeah. He was supposed to be a South African ghost that, and Derek went into a South African accent as well. And I mean, Most Haunted, I when that first came out, I found it quite entertaining. And then Carl Beatty banned me from their Facebook group because I dared to challenge him. I was coming to that, but just you mentioned the Most Haunted. Mystery's asking, was Gordon Smith there? I don't know who Gordon Smith is, though. I don't know if Mark knows who Gordon Smith is. No, I don't recognise Gordon Smith. That's not a name that's familiar to me.
I recognise the name. I used to watch it as well, religiously. I bought the CDs, the DVDs, and always remember one episode. I didn't click it first when I watched this episode. It was after when I watched it back. It was actually the vaults, the Blue Street Vaults in Edinburgh. And, Derek would come in and he would do his initial walk round. He'd been there before. Nobody knew where he was going to go, kind of thing. Yeah. But I remember him walking down this passageway and he stopped and looked in this hole in the wall. He says, well, I need to look in here. And when he looked in, there was a camera facing him. You could see him looking in. And I never clicked first. And it was later on I thought, wait a minute, how did they know to put a camera in there? How did they know he was going to stop at that particular bit in the wall? Mrs. saying he was a famous Scottish medium. Gordon Smith.
No, it's not one that I'm familiar with. But as I said, I'm not really a person that goes around hunting for mediums. But what I would say to anybody from my experience is go by word of mouth. Go to people who've actually, like I am quite happy to recommend June. There isn't another medium that I've dealt with who I would recommend, but I've been to June personally myself, and she's given me a very accurate reading. So I've got no qualms in that, but that's just my personal experience. I've got it on a CD in this drawer beside me now. I can tell you exactly when I had the readings. I've had 2 readings with June. I'll have to put my glasses on again because I only need glasses for reading, but I can't read without them.
I'm the opposite. I think I know who Misty's doing. I remember 2 Scottish, one had brown hair on Most Haunted. He was Scottish, and there was another Scottish guy.
Well, I don't know if you can see this on camera, but I had my reading on the 27th of January 2015. This was my book was launched on the 5th of October that year, so 9 months later. This June said to me, I've got your mother here with me. She tells me you're writing a book. It's not Kindle, she said, it's a book. She said, you've never written a book before, she said, but carry on with it. It will be successful. And she told me that. Now, apart from my close family who knew that I was beavering away on my PC, and even they didn't really know exactly what it was about. There was only my partner really that knew I was writing a book, and she's not interested in the paranormal. So that's what happened. And June burnt the tape. She recorded it and then burns it onto a CD. You take the CD away with you. I think it's a bit more sophisticated now. She says that what she does is it's all done electronically. So you give her your email address and she burns it and sends it to you in a digitized file. You save it on your computer as opposed to a disc like that. I'm actually going for another reading with June on the 1st of July. So I'm wrecking the place now. So yeah, that will be interesting. But June's normally says that looking forward, she won't go beyond 3 years. She tells you what she thinks is going to happen within 3 years, and she'll also ask you if there's anybody in your past that you particularly want to get in touch with. I chose not to go down that route because I didn't want to give her any clues. I feel confident now. Perhaps if I had a question about my parents who are both dead, I would feel confident to say, can you see if you can get hold of my mum or my dad? But the first time I saw her, I was hugely skeptical, and I thought, I'm not giving you anything, love, that is going to give you any clues about me. I'm going to answer questions yes, no, and not appear enthusiastic about some things you say or more than others. I'm not going to do anything. But I must admit, June was very, very good.
And she sounds really similar. Just we said books. That woman that I seen, she also described my dad to me, and she says, "Your dad's saying that you've got a gift. You keep finding books on the subject, and you have to keep studying it. You keep finding books." And it was actually true because I'd went to the library or sometime before it, and I'd actually getting books on spiritualism. We said, we've only got the one. So I took it home, read it, took it back, handed it in, and I decided to have another wee look, just through the books. And I found another one. And this happened 5, maybe 6 times. Yeah. Every time I went back, I'd find it. And, I'm thinking, well, they told me there was only one book. I keep, another one. And so this woman says you keep finding books on this subject, and you have to keep studying it. So it does, But I told people, I was went to work the next day, so I went to see medium last night, circuits, all the rubbish. Well, I'm not saying, I can't explain how she knew about Donna, my ex-girlfriend, my gran, my dad. As you said, Mark, details that nobody would know,
No.
And this woman was spot on. But there are, the other side of the coin, unfortunately, as you say, there are mediums out there who are a load of BS. They look for the wee recognition in somebody's eye or facial expression, and then they hook onto that. And
I think the thing what really annoys me about them most of all is they can actually take advantage of people at a very emotional time of their life. If somebody loses someone dear to them, they are particularly vulnerable. They've lost that person. They know they're never going to see them again. They love them. So there's natural for them to want to some form of communication to show that that person still exists somewhere in some form. So when people pass away, one of the things that sometimes said to me, you shouldn't, if someone goes away, your husband, your wife dies, and you shouldn't go and have a reading for at least 6 months because it takes them that long to get to the other side. And I think that's rubbish. I mean, the amount of times I've been called out to places where people have lost someone and they've actually seen them or had an experience of that person within a week of their death. So I think it's the opposite. I think that when they're between this world and the next, that's the time when they are most at their active, if you are open to them and stuff like that. And I think as well, that's probably why children, and you're talking about imaginary friends, there's certainly plenty of stories around where children have got an imaginary friend and they come up with descriptions or names of a long past family member who's probably died before they were even born, and they're able to tell you details. Now, how does that work? I've interviewed 1 or 2 people that have had that sort of experience, and I think that as a child you'll probably your mind is a bit more open. You know, you believe fairy stories and things like that, where as humans, we hear something that doesn't sound right, we dismiss it immediately. You know, I didn't used to tell people when I was very young that I did paranormal investigations, because if I did, I could almost look at them in the face and see them sort of imagining the word nutter tattooed across my forehead. So as I got older, you get a little bit more confident, and you think, oh, I don't care what they think, you know. It's something I do, the same as someone else repairs cars or does whatever they do for a hobby. This is my hobby. I enjoy it. I don't really need to speak to people about it. I wrote my book, and people who are interested in that subject will read it. People who won't will say load of rubbish, you know, so what?
That's it. It's, you know, it's the old coin scenario again. There's both sides. You know,
Yeah.
Sarah and I, you know, we don't tell a lot of people what we do, but I mean, I've been into paranormal for 30 years, and even, you know, during working, what have you, I've never actually spoke to anybody about it, because, you know, just some people like fishing, you know, or different kind of hobbies. This is our hobby, and we love what we're doing. And as you say, I do think we're nuts sometimes if we're out in a graveyard or
Yeah.
at 1 or 2 in the morning, you know, holding a meter or a grid, you know, a grid pen, whatever. I think you are just nuts. But the same can be said for them sitting at a riverbank at 2 in the morning holding a fishing rod.
Absolutely. You know, if they're sitting there and it's peeing down with rain and they're not getting a bite, and you're thinking, why are you sitting out in the rain and cold at 2 in the morning? You know, but to them, they're still enjoying it. And so I think that the trouble is with the paranormal world is that it's so popular now. It's more popular than it's ever been. I think people have gone from the stage of where they're sort of a little bit too embarrassed, like I was, to talk to people about it, because they feel that they'll be ridiculed and thought of as mentally unstable or whatever. And you know, when I came home, and my experience when I was 15, and that was broad daylight, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, summer's day, and I came home and told my parents, they just basically said, "Don't be so bloody stupid," you know. That was their attitude.
Exactly. And
if my uncle Trevor hadn't have been heavily involved in it, then probably I wouldn't be here talking to you now. I remember Trevor saying to me when I explained this to him, it was in this house, 1976. He said, "When you get to my age, boy," he says, "science will have the answers for this." He said, and that was 45 years ago. Now, I don't think we've moved on that much to having the answers in 45 years, but that's what he told me when I was 15. But in a way, if we did have the answers, I think perhaps it wouldn't be so interesting.
it wouldn't be so interesting, no.
No, because it's like, you know, once you know what causes something, you've witnessed something yourself, and an explanation is there, and it's logical, and you understand it, then you sort of accept it, and therefore it doesn't intrigue you anymore.
That's it. There must be one.
Yeah. If you've experienced it, and then you've gone out and experienced it, and you're thinking, well, how did that happen? What caused that to happen? Because I would say, and this is me being honest, I don't like the word ghost hunting. And the reason I don't is because in 40 odd years, I've seen one apparition, one ghost. I've been on investigations where people I know and trust, probably a handful, where people I know and trust say they've seen an apparition. And I do believe them. But realistically, you don't see apparitions very much. When you speak to people and they've done paranormal investigation, you say, how did it go? Oh, it's fantastic. Did you see any ghosts? No. Well, what happened then? And what they actually explain to you is what I would call poltergeist activity. Sounds, things moving, that type of thing. Now, that to me it's paranormal, but it's another aspect of the paranormal. You know, the paranormal is a huge umbrella. You've got things like UFOs, crop circles, all these things fall under that. The word paranormal means something that science is yet to be able to explain. And I think that poltergeist, from my experience, you are far likely to encounter poltergeist activity if you do encounter true paranormal activity. And I think that poltergeist activity is much, much more common than people think. There's a friend of mine who's a member of the SPR called John Fraser, and he's written a book called Poltergeist. And I was fortunate enough to be sent a copy. I've got it in my book shelf downstairs, and he sent me it before it was published, and I read through it, and I really related to what he was saying because it mirrored my experiences. When people talk poltergeists, we think Enfield hauntings, we think of tables and chairs flying around the room and the film Poltergeist and things like that.
Yeah.
I think poltergeist activity is a lot more common and a lot more subtle. I've witnessed poltergeist activity probably a dozen times where I've seen things move, and I've been with other people who've seen them move as well. So it's not that I've made a mistake. If I have, then, as I told you, that episode in the Peterborough Museum, we saw a rubber ball do a full circle. We were only 2 foot away from it, laying on the floor. 4 of us, we all witnessed it. And I think you can't say for definite that that is caused by somebody who has expired, a ghost, a spirit, or whatever you want to call it. We could be doing it telekinetically with our minds and not even know we've got that ability. I do happen to know a friend of mine is a consultant psychiatrist, and he told me years and years ago that half of our brain, the top scientists don't know what it can do. They don't know what it does or what it's capable of. So we may well be, mediums may well be able to see spirit, and they may be telling the truth, some of them. That, you know, you may be able to use telepathy and things like that. We just haven't developed that part of our brain yet. You know, it's only a few thousand years ago we couldn't talk. We certainly couldn't read and write. So our brain is evolving all the time and getting more and more powerful. So there is a possibility that that ball that moved, we moved it because we wanted it to move. And we were sitting there calling out, any astral beings here, any spirit people, could you show us a sign you're here, please, by moving the ball? Because that will validate that you're here with us. So we are, in a way, willing it to move. And it did. Yeah. But, you know, you still can't say that it was moved by the spirit of someone who was dead, who'd expired. You have to sort of take into account all other possible theories too. It was definitely paranormal. I've no doubt it was paranormal, but whether it's to do with dead people is not conclusive.
That's a we've had a couple of things happen in here. We've done a couple of investigations in here, and we've had some not major result, but we did get one good one on the laser grid, which is on our YouTube channel. But I was just, I hope Sarah's still in the chat. I think it was last week or the week before. We put our keys in the door, in the front door, and we just, I leave them in. I have it locked on the door as soon as they come in. But it was Sarah and the wee one. Sarah thought she heard her. Sarah, be able to tell you about. Basically, the keys were in the lock, and the key ring was swinging slightly. Now, we've been in the house for quite some time, so there's no if we just shut the door. It was just the wee one and I that were in. And so I went up to the door and I stopped them from swinging, and I took my hand away, and I don't know, about 10, 15 seconds later, they started just to swing ever so slightly again. I'm not saying it was paranormal, but we can explain why that key ring was, started to swing again. Yeah. And one of the cats, maybe the first time you think maybe the cats jumped up at the door, but then I stopped it from swinging, and I moved away, and then it started to swing again. I thought, well, I can't explain that. It's just we've not touched it. There's no vibrations or anything like that. And I see, as you say, it's not a case of throwing tables and chairs about the kitchen or the living room. It could be
I've seen. I went to a place near Milton Keynes once with another paranormal group, and I saw a group of women there table tipping, and I actually filmed it. I've got it on my PC somewhere, and I haven't posted it on Facebook or anything because I wasn't given permission to do so. I've also got some very interesting footage which Robert Snow sent to me. Robert, as I said, probably read more paranormal books than anybody else. He died about 6 months ago, bless him. But he sent me some poltergeist black and white material he got from Russia. Now, this is incredible. This is extreme poltergeist. And he was dealing with a scientist there who was working on it, trying to explain it. And he died. I've still got it on my PC. I won't stick it out there in the world, but I've kept it because I can't give it back to him. But you will find that in John Fraser's book, John is on the council of the Society for Psychical Research, the SPR, and John says that in many instances people attribute those very minor things to he puts the initials, just one of those things. In other words, we sort of accept it. You put your keys on the mantelpiece, you're in the house alone, you're in there all day, there's nobody else in the house, you go to get your keys, they're not there. You hunt high and low, you can't find your keys anywhere. You ring up somebody and say, bring me a spare set of keys, I can't move. You've had no one in the house. A week later, you go and find that set of keys on top of your fridge or whatever. Now, there's been nobody else in the house, so how are those keys when you know you've left them on the mantelpiece? It's then you start doubting your own, did I perhaps pick them up and just forget about it and transfer them to the kitchen? Oh, I bet I did that. So it's just one of those things that you forgot about, and we accept it. But if you actually analyse those things, you know, I think that most of the paranormal activity that groups go out and experience, if you say to them when they've had a really good evening, did you see any ghosts? They'll say no. They'll tell you what I would classify as poltergeist activity, noises, intelligent communication through noises or moving things and that type of thing. Actually seeing an apparition of a human being is, in my 40 odd years, I've seen one. So, and that's in the book. I had to put that story in the book because that's really how it started. And if I'd have known the history of that building and known its history, I could have even then perhaps have been persuaded, well, subconsciously you knew that it was a monastic farm one day, so there would have been monks there. You knew that. So your unconscious mind has made you see a monk. But I didn't. I just thought I was 15. I just thought it was a very old farmhouse. I couldn't even told you how old it was. I just knew it was very old, as in over 100 years. I was a 15-year-old kid, you know. So, and then when I went outside and said to my friend who lived there, he could tell by my face something was wrong. And he said, I get called Edge or Edgy, short for Egerton. He said, what's that? I said, Dave, you're not going to believe this, mate. I said, I've just seen a monk in your washroom. And this was a room part of this house. And I could tell straight away from his face that he wasn't shocked. The very first thing he said to me was, don't tell Chris. And Chris was his sister, Christine. She was about 12, so we don't want to frighten her. He then went and told me that the farm is called Midlow Grange Farm. And he told me that the word Grange actually means monastic, and that the farm had been owned by Ramsey Abbey, which is probably 15 miles as the crow flies away. And they'd owned it before this building, this house was even built. We're talking 12th century. The farmhouse was 16th century. So there would have been monks there. And to this very day, David still farms the land, and they dig up clay pipes, which these monks would have smoked. Now, they wouldn't have been smoking tobacco because that was before tobacco was in the country. They would have been smoking opium or cannabis, which was grown. Cambridgeshire is in an area of England called the Fens. It's very flat. It's the most fertile soil in the whole of the country because it was once underwater. And Ramsey itself was once an island. It was a mile from the British mainland because it was surrounded by water. And then they drained it, and it's become the most richest soil for growing food. So here in Cambridge, Suffolk, Norfolk is all classed as the Fens.
Brad put up a good theory of some of the keys. Could have been a dog on the other side of the door, Scott. Possibly, when Sarah says we've got a metal ramp outside, right outside the door. So we probably have heard, you know, anybody or anything on the ramp outside. Possibly. Thanks anyway, Brad, for the, you know, that is one possible explanation. And as you said earlier on,
you have to explore every possibility. Now, I don't know, getting back to Underwood, who taught me, and Trevor, Underwood was actually described by, I'm trying to think whose daughter it was, somebody famous. Oh, I think it was Harry Price's daughter. He was explained as the Sherlock Holmes of the paranormal world, because he worked on the same thesis as Sherlock Holmes, that when you eliminate everything, what you're left with is possibly the truth. So when I go on a paranormal investigation, Instead of trying to prove that it is paranormal, I work the opposite way. I try to prove that it's not. And if you do that and you look at every possible explanation, and there may be some explanations that I haven't thought of. So that's why it's worthwhile having other people's input. Like the guy just said, you know, could it have been a dog? Because, you know, it's a possibility. But when you've dismissed everything, what remains is probably the truth. And if you read the Sherlock Holmes books, Conan Doyle, that's the way he works. And Underwood told me to adopt the same, and that's what I do. So I get described as a skeptical paranormal investigator, because that's what I am.
I think that's the best way to be. You know, I mean, no disrespect to other teams and that, but I've seen many a team that will, you know, there's no skeptics on it at all. You know, I mean, I believe in the paranormal, also we do, you know, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But there's believing and there's having an open mind. You get these teams who will go into a cemetery, and as soon as they hear it, that's a ghost. And they're all giddy and all the rest of it. But nobody actually stands and says, right, well, wait a minute, we're in the middle of nowhere. It might have been a fox, might have been the wind. You know, and so they just label it paranormal. Whereas
as I said to you, Scott, in my book, there is only one location. There's 55 haunted locations in there in Huntingdonshire. They've all got names of people who've actually been witnesses or whatever. I wasn't interested in Joe Bloggs who come out the pub after 10 pints of Stella and saw a ghost. I wanted names or newspaper articles, something to give the story credibility. And I could have put another 55 stories in there that when I analysed them, they weren't credible enough to go in there. There is only one in the book, which is Nuns Bridge, which is near to Hinchinbrook House, which is outdoors. And I very, very rarely do an outdoor investigation because it's so difficult to control. You've got wildlife, you've got the elements to deal with. My ideal investigation is to go into a house that has a haunted reputation for historically for a long time, and that it's been well documented what happens. And I'll probably go in there with a team of 6 to 12 people, depending on the size. A normal, like, semi-detached house like mine, I'd probably take 3 or 4 people maximum. And you have one person who's a good dowser, one person who's an accurate recorder of details, a scribe, one person with a camera. And the less people you have, the more controlled the investigation, the less chance there is of noise pollution and that sort of thing. And so when you do an investigation outdoors, they you know, they are valid. There are outdoor places that are haunted, there's no doubt of that. But to do a controlled investigation in one, you've got to be aware that I don't know, I wrote on one of my Facebook pages, I went to Whitby Abbey a couple of years ago, and it reminded me the first time I went there in the 80s. And then I was doing a lone vigil, which is something I never do now. And this was, again, because of Underwood. Underwood told me these lone vigils that you see on TV and that, they're all very dramatic. He says, but if you do a lone vigil, you don't know what you're dealing with. If you get into any sort of trouble, you've got no one there to help you. He said, but just as importantly, if anything happens, you're the only witness. So someone turns around to you, however incredible, you say, oh, I just bumped into a ghost and we had a conversation. And he says, I'm going to win the lottery this week. People will turn around to you and say, so you say, you know, if you've got 3 or 4 people with you as well, then you've got witnesses that and probably have no reason to back up your story other than the fact it really happened. So I think that to do serious paranormal investigations, and you have to remember that people do paranormal investigations for different reasons. Sometimes people do them because it's fun, and whether they get paranormal activity or they don't, it's fun. Even if they just enjoy hiding behind a door and jumping out on their friend, it's fun. And there's nothing wrong with that, to be quite honest. It's not what I do. I do take them quite seriously, and I try my best to do a proper controlled investigation and eliminate anything that could possibly be confused as paranormal, which isn't. And then, of course, when you do get something and you come to analyze it, the possibilities of what it could be are much smaller. And so you can, you know, I think if you're going to do a serious paranormal investigation, you have to be very controlled. You don't really want people moving about. You don't really want other people in the building. You certainly don't want any Wi-Fi or that thing there. But, you know, in a building, you don't want anybody with their mobile phones on. But even if they've all got their mobile phones off and you're using gizmos like REM pods and that, the house next door or the other side, they may well have Wi-Fi, BT that reaches 100 yards. You could be picking up their signals on you. So when I see people, you know, broadcasting live investigations and getting excited because the REM pod's going off, I think, well, you know, you've got a phone, you're streaming live on Facebook. Of course, that thing's going to pick up signals. And I don't mean that disrespectful, because people get enjoyment out of it, and so I don't say, oh, they shouldn't do this. And I never criticize people in the way they work, because they have their own ways of working, and ultimately, at the end of the day, if they're enjoying it and doing what they do, that's all what it's about, isn't it? At the end of the day, whether I believe in it or I don't is my business. So I tend not to really mix too much with other groups, not because I'm snobby and I think that I'm better than them. It's really because I know that people will have their theories which will differ to mine, and I don't see the point in getting into an intelligent adult debate where you have respect for one another like we're doing now. Is fine, but I'm just honestly telling you my opinions that, you know, with all the very rare gizmos about, the proof of the pudding, if you buy these devices, if you buy an electrical device in this country, a Hoover TV, and you look in the manual that accompanies it, it will tell you what that device is capable of. If you buy something like a REM pod or wherever you get it from, the States or wherever, you will not have that information in there because it's not proven that it can do that. So by law, they're not allowed to put that in there. And a lot of people get this gizmo, discard the box, discard the instructions because they've seen it on TV or whatever, whack it on, and then, you know, they're picking up stuff, and they're not sort of registering. This thing has got electronic receivers in. It's built to pick up electronic signals, which we think are present when a ghost manifests, the genesis of a ghost or whatever. But, you know, I'm now streaming this live that this thing's flashing, and it could be my mobile phone that's actually the cause.
Yeah.
So
we did an investigation just we were talking about REM pods. We did an investigation with another team, Caledonia, about 2-3 weeks ago. Now it's an old power station, and they were using a REM pod. We don't have one, but they had one, and it was on a staircase. And this thing, there was three females, 2 males, and it only seemed to respond to one of the girls called Tracy. Yeah. And it was staying on constantly. So what Tracy did was say to, you know, if somebody's standing there, move back so that the lights go off. Yeah. And right away, the light went off. Yeah. And she says, right, come back again so we can see the light. And the light came back on as soon as she said it. So, I mean, we're not saying that's paranormal, but we can explain it when she says it, you know, the light went off, and then she's like, come back and put the light on. And
as I said to you, it's a bit like with electrical gizmos. They have their place. If something is corresponding with you for, let's say, a minute or more, then, and that thing is responding to your commands for a minute or more, I think we can safely say it's probably not a rogue signal coming from a taxi cab, coming from somebody's text message coming to someone's phone. If you're getting an intelligent conversation for that period of time, you can then turn around and probably dismiss the fact that it could be a rogue signal. I would still be a little bit skeptical. I had a very interesting incident like that with an EMF meter, a place called Moot Hall in Bedfordshire. It's a very old building, totally wood. It's a nightmare to investigate because it's got an upstairs and a downstairs, and it's all old wood. So at night when the building cools, it creaks and it groans and it makes all sorts of noises. But there's supposed to be a spirit boy that's sort of close to the reception desk there. And I was communicating to this MF meter, and I was saying, I want you to light the lights up. I'll ask you questions, and if the answer is yes, you light the light up. If it's no, you don't light the light up. And I went on for about 4 minutes with this, and, you know, exactly on demand every time. I couldn't accept that it could be coincidence of signals coming at exactly that time for 4 minutes It's just too long. So that was very interesting. But as I said, I've had some good success stories with the EMF meters, but in the last 20 years, when we've seen Wi-Fi and 3G, 5G, 4G and all that, we've got to remember that there's signals bouncing all over the place. So if we have any devices that have electronic receivers in them, which most ghost hunting apparatus do, I tend to be a bit old school. I tend to like to work with a glass, work with a crystal pendulum. I don't think I'm particularly sensitive. Some of my team say that I am, but I don't think I am. I might be a little bit, but maybe I've developed that through all the years of doing it, but I'm not a person who can go into a building and say, there's something here, this is haunted. I can be there on an investigation and I can feel something, but you've got to imagine as well, you know, if you're in a place and you know it's haunted and you can't understand it, you're naturally a little bit fearful of things we don't understand. So that sort of hairs on the back of the neck thing, that can happen. You know, it happens when you sit and watch a horror film and you don't know what's going to happen next. Hairs in your neck go back up and you can feel your heart beat a bit faster. Now, we know that's not paranormal, it's just a story. And you can be playing that story in your mind and have the same thing. So you have to be very, very grounded and dismiss all that and say, could it be me just because I'm a little bit frightened? Fear is very contagious. If you get somebody that's, you know, gets spooked, they can soon make the rest of the group get spooked because we know that we're dealing with something that we don't understand fully.
Something that's happened to me in the last few couple of investigations we've been at, found very odd. I can't explain it. We've been going to, it's called Alloway Kirk. We've been there about 3 times now, and I've been told there's a young girl there called Rebecca, 16-year-old. She's sort of kind of a liking to me as a father figure. Well, not the investigation, the previous one beforehand, I was standing at a headstone and my right hand was roasting basically. My left hand was freezing. I couldn't explain it. So I went to, the girls were on the other side of the Kirk, so I went back and joined them. And again, same thing, right hand warm, this hand was freezing. We were back there on Thursday night, I believe it was, Wednesday or Thursday night, we went back, I think it was Thursday. And we were standing, and again, my right hand, I was told Rebecca was there back with us. Again, my right hand was roasting. And I said to the girls and Johnny and the team, I said, feel the difference between my 2 hands. Now, I'm not saying it's paranormal, but that's happened 3 times in 3 different locations in this kirkyard. I can't explain that.
Yeah, and I think that's why you do it. And, you know, you don't do it to impress the world and show that there's paranormal. You do it because of your own interest and intrigue. I don't feel the need to, okay, I've written a book and explained about some of my experiences, but that was basically because I'd made a promise to my aunt. She was saying to me, you know, she was dying, she was 3 months from death, and she kept saying, you know, she'd been going on at me for at least 15 years. You've got to write a book. No one's ever written a book about Huntingdonshire. You've got books about Cambridgeshire where they've touched on properties in Huntingdonshire, but not a book just on Huntingdonshire itself. And she said, you must know from the amount of time you've been doing it more about Huntingdonshire's ghosts and the paranormal than anyone. And to be fair, she's probably right. And so I didn't actually even promise her I'd do it. I said to Marilyn, or I used to call her Emma, I used to call her Auntie Em, I said, I'll do my best for you. And the reason I hadn't written a book was because I'd got 2 young kids. I was playing a lot of football and a lot of cricket, working full time. I just haven't got time to write a book, you know.
That's it. It's very, very time consuming.
Yeah. It took me 2 years to write.
A long time. A long time. That I was want to chat with you about, Mark, was obviously you get 40 years experience in the field, and your haunted history page as well. As I said earlier on, it's Edinburgh. It's our favourite location, has been for many years.
I'd love to go up there with you because you know there's nothing like local knowledge. I've found that out whenever I've been to places, and I've been to some places where I occasionally have been fooled into thinking that something was paranormal and then have been able to debunk it. But at the time, I've been pretty certain that it was paranormal. And they're quite funny, actually. But Edinburgh, I went to Hollywood. I went to Mary King's Close, the vaults. I went to the cemetery at Greatfriars. I didn't really know, I only knew what I'd read online. And I found when I was researching my book that you cannot rely on what you see online. If you're writing a book, folks, anybody, don't look online and take your information from there, because it could have been posted. Wikipedia is a perfect example. Wikipedia is updated by people. Anybody really can go and update a Wikipedia page. So whether the content that they're updating is right, you put your trust in the fact that they know something that other people don't, and what they're posting there is correct. But I'll give you an example of this. I had an instance a couple of years, 2017. I ended up going to court in Cambridge to give evidence against a person who was running a paranormal group, and he was basically doing it for profit. He was saying he was running a non-profit making society. He was telling people that once they joined his group, that it was mandatory they had to do training, and that he had an accreditation with a paranormal body called ASAP, and it was ASAP that were telling, if you wanted to he wanted to keep his accreditation, you had to do this training, pay him 40 quid. Well, this couple from Rugby got caught, and they drove from Rugby to Royston, where he lives, and he had them drawing elephants and all sorts of things. Paid them both, each paid him 40 quid plus their petrol. I got involved, and I happen to know people at ASAP, and I know people in the paranormal world. I went and checked him out. He hadn't had any dealings with ASAP since 2004. His website said that he'd got an accreditation with them. His paperwork said he got an accreditation with them. His paperwork also said he'd got Peter Underwood as his president, which I thought was very interesting, because Peter Underwood died in 2014, and obviously I knew that. He died in November 2014. I nearly went to his funeral. I didn't go in the end. And so I pointed out to him, that's fascinating that you've got Peter Underwood as your president, because he's dead. So, is he president from beyond the grave? And he sort of, very slick, this guy, he turned it around, and he said that his president was now another famous celebrity from the paranormal world. I won't say who, because I wouldn't want to embarrass the guy in particular. But obviously, ASAP wrote to the courts and told the courts that this man hadn't had any dealings with them. He hadn't got any accreditation with them. He wasn't qualified to deliver any training on their behalf. He wasn't giving out any certificates. And there you go. He wasn't who he was. So he was found guilty of misrepresentation, fraud. He was told to pay the people their money back. He got a county court judgment against him. He was also told to either amend or remove his website. He's still out there, and he's still taking people in. And his interest isn't the paranormal. It's purely money. He was taking money off people. He even told me, I went on an investigation where nothing happened, and I reported it on Facebook. And he came to me and said, you can't put that nothing happened, because things did happen. And yes, there was noises in an attic. There was a gale blowing outside. We was in an old property. If there was a cardboard box or anything in that attic, it was probably getting tossed around the place. There was a perfectly logical explanation as to why we were hearing noises. But obviously, he wanted people to think the place was haunted, because they were each paying him 40 quid to go and investigate there.
You see, I've heard, as you said, don't mention any names, but I've heard recently about, people sitting exams just from other groups. They claim to be, and they get handed out a license and what have you. Yeah. They're qualified and stuff, and they've got no accreditation at all, and it can be easily checked out, Yes. I just find that,
Your average person who's interested in ghost hunting, who's never done it before, they're very excited about it, and they tend to take it that the person who's running it is an expert, and that everything he says is true or she says is true, And you know, do a bit of research, people out there, and check it out, because these people, you know, they're just basically charlatans, and all they're really interested in is getting on, paying next to nothing for. This particular guy did another investigation in Royston, in a place called the Shop on the Corner, and he'd been doing this investigations there for ages, charging people 40 odd quid a time. I went to the actual owner of the property and spoke to him, and he said, "Oh, I didn't know he was charging people. He gives me 2 bottles of wine for letting him use the premises for the night." So this was the guy was then, we'd gone there near Christmas it was, and it was so windy, a 30-foot Christmas tree was nearly bent in half. The building was old, it wasn't double glazed, so it had a load of these mobiles hanging from the roof because it was a gift shop. They were all moving around. Well, of course they would. You know, it was blowing like that. There was just single pane glass. There was an explanation, logical, but he got right. Well, you can't write that nothing happened, because it did. And I thought, rubbish. You just want to take people there again, but telling them it's haunted. I saw no evidence at all. And, you know, there was probably 12, 14 people there had all paid him 45 quid. He'd paid, as the owner, 2 bottles of wine. So do your maths, you know.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, do the math, you know, and it's something that really, and maybe I'm wrong in saying it, but, you know, everybody's got their own opinion. It's when people turn around and say they're experts, and you think, my humble opinion is that in the paranormal, there's no experts, because it's something that nobody knows everything about.
No, people have said to me, "Oh, you're an expert in the field." I've done radio interviews. I've done radio interviews in the States. I've been on Paranormal Lockdown and other things, and people have turned around and said, "Oh, you're an expert." I said, "No." I said, "I'm very experienced. I'm not an expert. Nobody knows all the answers to this." And some people get quite, "Oh, you know, that's a fashionable thing to say," but it's the truth. If I knew everything, then probably I wouldn't be interested in it anymore, because I know it all. And, you know, when you know something inside out, after a while, it becomes boring, because you can explain everything, you know everything. So why would you want to keep doing it?
Exactly. You know, to me, there's no experts. You can have more, you see, no, I'm not an expert. As you just says, you can have more experience than the next guy or the next guy. But it doesn't mean you're better than them. It just means you've been doing it longer. Or you've been, you know, studying it longer or studying it more. And it's something. Or
you could be like this guy I was telling you about, who went to court and be a really slick con man. I mean, he was really good. He actually wrote to the judge when he heard that I'd been called to give evidence, saying that in his opinion, I was mentally ill, and anything that I say in court should not be relied upon. Now, I countered that. I'd worked for a large company called DuPont, which was at the time the 5th biggest company in the whole world. DuPont invented nylon, and they're basically America's ICI, huge chemical firm. I worked with them for 25 years, and my boss, who long retired, I said, "This guy's written into the courts and saying that I'm mentally ill and that I'd caused problems at work where you were my boss." And he said, "What's he on?" You know. And he'd pulled this stunt before. When people had rumbled him and caught him out, his prime defence was to make out that they were mentally ill, and you couldn't rely on anything they said. Very, very slick guy, this guy was. So, you know, people be very careful. Likewise, when you get people writing to you and they're offering you academic qualifications in the paranormal, you know, there are 1 or 2 governing bodies. I'll give you another example with this particular person. He wrote to the courts and said that he'd studied a course with an organisation based in Manchester called MAPIT. Well, as it happened, I know the person who runs MAPIT, a guy called Steve Meara, and I wrote to Steve and said, "This guy is saying he's done some training with you, and he's got a qualification that entitles him to teach. Is that right?" And he wrote me back on MAPIT paper and said, "Mark, never heard of this guy." I said, "That's a lie, actually. We have heard of him. We'd had a complaint about him from another paranormal body about his associations, or his claims of his associations with ASAP. I've still got that letter on my computer. I can send it to you if you want." But it just shows he had the gall to write to the courts and say that he'd completed a qualification with this sort of governing body it's called Mapit, M-A-P-I-T. They're based in Manchester, and they publish a magazine. People might have seen the magazine monthly called Phenomena. It's an e-magazine, and it's generally published free of charge. Steve's a top guy, and you know, he wrote to me and put that in writing. They'd never heard of this particular guy, not in academic circles, even what registered. He said he could well have taken the information from another student and taken their paperwork, but we've not got him registered, and he hasn't qualified in his name in our group, which was what he was saying. The judge absolutely slaughtered him. He wiped the floor with him. In less than 2 hours, he'd found him guilty. Didn't even bother to listen to his witnesses he'd brought along. He said, you know, the guy at one stage said to the judge, my training isn't mandatory. And the judge stood there with his paperwork and said, Mr. O'Dell, it says here, training must be taken within 3 months of joining your organisation. Do you not know what the word must means? And, you know, I just laughed then. I knew that we won. And I was pleased because this couple were old age pensioners, and he'd duped them twice. They'd come down from Rugby to Royston. They'd paid him each 30, 40 quid each for this training. They'd gone away thinking that they'd got an ASAP accredited training package behind them. He then duped them into coming back again to do advanced training. And this guy, this was around about 2015, he'd had no involvement at all with ASAP since 2004. And ASAP kindly wrote to the courts and told them that, which is why he hadn't got a leg to stand on, basically. But, you know, it's a worry that there are people out there that will do that and pretend to be something that they're not. And normally they've got a reason, and 9 times out of 10 it's money.
Exactly, and it really boils my blood when I hear or read about things like that, and you think, you know, seriously qualifications to be you know, an investigator or whatever, you know, and unfortunately, as you said earlier on, Mark, the paranormal field now is massive for what it was 20, 30 years ago. And it's a good thing in a way, but the other road is it's a bad thing because it's opened up so many doors for these con people to think, I can be an easy here. You know, I can say I'm a medium, I can say we can do this and that. And so they just kind of flood. And it's a kind of spaghetti junction. You know, it's genuine teams in there. And, you know, they're all kind of no fighting with each other. But these this is why I don't mean this to sound this as arrogant or rude, but I tend to keep within my own little circle. I get invited to a lot of investigations, and a lot of them are by commercial groups, and I sometimes get asked to. Hinchinbrook House is a favourite venue for your average paranormal team. Hinchinbrook House charge about 1,200 quid for a Saturday night, so you'll get the big commercial groups turn up there with 40 to 60 people, all paying 60 quid. How can you do a paranormal investigation, controlled investigation, with 40 to 60 people, and probably half of those are going on their first ever paranormal investigation? They don't know anything about them, they don't know the etiquette, and so on and so forth. But if Hinchinbrook House can get that sort of money on a Saturday night, they're going to keep doing it. So if I go along with my 6-man team and say, can I come here and do an investigation? They'll say, that's 1,200 quid. And I've got 6 people that I've got to spread that cost between. I'm quite lucky now that I don't very often get charged to do investigations. I normally get asked to go in, either with another team to support them, or the owner of the property will ask me to come in because disturbances or historical history, and he knows that I won't bullshit them. I'll tell them it straight if I don't think there's anything there. I hopefully will be going into Hinchinbrook House again, and I won't be charged. You know, to go in and do a proper controlled investigation, I'll probably take a team of 12 people with me. I'm taking people around the house and helping Hinchinbrook House, Hinchinbrook School. So hopefully they'll help me by allowing me, instead of charging them money to do what I do, they'll represent the favour and say, right, okay, Mark, you can bring a team in, and you know, you've earned that from the work you've done. When people go there, it's a fantastic house. People go there to get married.
So if you've got somebody like me who knows the history, and you walk that person around and say, this is where you want to get married. Well, this is where James I visited and stayed. This is where Elizabeth I stayed. This is where Charles I spent a night. And you tell them the history of the house. Why would you not want to get married there? You know, oh, yeah, it's a talking point. Yeah, I got married in a house where James I stayed. You know, the Scottish king, he stayed there regularly. Elizabeth I stayed there one night. Charles I stayed there. So much history at Hinchinbrook. The guy who invented the sandwich lived there. You know, he was also a member of the Hellfire Club. There's when you impart that history on them, it's all linked into the hauntings. You know, I can help them sell the property for people who want to spend 1,500 quid on getting married there. You know, and using the house for a day.
The old word of mouth, isn't it? It's the old word of mouth thing.
Well, I'd like to think, without, you know, the fact that Paranormal Lockdown asked me to go in there was because they knew that I knew my stuff. I knew that house. I'd been to school there. I've been involved with it from a paranormal principle from the 1970s. So you're talking 50 years. So this particular individual that I went to court wrote a book about paranormal Cambridgeshire. Hinchinbrook House, if you read the story in there, it's nonsense. And not only that, Hinchinbrook is spelt wrong in the book. It hasn't got the E on the end. And if you read the book, it's called Paranormal Cambridgeshire. If you read the book, you'll find that Hinchinbrook is spelt incorrectly. I think when I pointed it out to him, he had the book reprinted and tried to withdraw all the old copies that had all these errors in. I mean, if you're researching a place properly, you'd get the name spelt right, wouldn't you? It wasn't just the title, it was the whole story, you know.
Well, that's it. If you're going to talk about something, I mean, I know I pronounce things wrong sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
If you're going to talk about something or write a book about it, then get the words right. Get the spelling right. You know, the location, whatever it is.
Now, if you've researched that property properly, you should at least know how to spell the name of it, shouldn't you? I mean, that's just common sense to me.
That is basically it is, but just before we wind up for now, Matt, I just want to jump back to Edinburgh. Obviously, you know, as I said, they are around 40 years in the game, sort of thing, in the game, 40 years in the field. You've been to Edinburgh, the Mary King's Close, the Royal Mile, Greatfriars. What's your opinion on the Mackenzie poltergeist?
With the tomb, you mean? And the tramp who fell through the floor and all that. Obviously, I've read up about it. I don't know, to be honest. You know, standing back and being really honest, I would say that when items are documented in that much detail, there's always a grain of truth there. Somebody like yourself who lives there locally, who goes regularly, you would probably be better qualified to answer that question than me. I went there probably as a tourist. I was really lucky with Mary King's Close because I was allowed to go in there by myself. I explained who I was, I showed them my book, and they said, if you come at this certain time, there'll be no other people here, we'll just walk you through. So I got a sort of lone sort of showed around the place. It's certainly eerie. I wasn't doing a paranormal investigation. I wasn't doing a paranormal investigation at Holyrood House. I went to these haunted places because I'd read about them. But to answer your question honestly, Scott, I couldn't, because you know, I hadn't. You're more experienced than that than me, and as I've got 40 years experience, but not at the Mackenzie grade. It's certainly what I do find quite interesting about Scottish folklore and Scottish ghost stories. They're always a little bit grisly, aren't they? Compared to many others, that, you know, they are a little bit horror. There's a little bit of horror going on in them.
No, you are right there, Mark. I mean, I think English, no offence to English, you know, we've got a lot of many English friends, including yourself, obviously. A lot of the English ghost stories seem to be quite elegant. You know,
Yes.
if that's the right, I don't know if that's the right word, but as you say, when you read about Scottish ghost stories, like the Mackenzie poltergeist, which personally I don't believe exists, but it is all blood and guts.
Yes.
You know, people getting tortured, hung, drawn and quartered, beheaded, whatever. You know, they all lost something. The Greatfriars has got a lot of history. The Mackenzie poltergeist, my opinion, you know, it's just my opinion, it doesn't exist. All the attacks in Greatfriars have actually happened in the Black Mausoleum, which is in the Covenanters prison. A lot of people get the Black Mausoleum, they think the Black Mausoleum is the Mackenzie tomb. It's not, it's two separate places. Nothing's ever happened at the Mackenzie tomb except the tramp breaking in, and then you had the two young boys that broke in and took the skull off of the Mackenzie corpse. Everything else has happened in the Black Mausoleum. That's the reason the Covenanters is now locked.
You're much more experienced. You can't beat local knowledge, and this is why I say to people, you know, when I go around the country doing a paranormal investigation, I was in Norwich not last week, the week before. I spent 3 or 4 days up there, and I went into Blicklin Hall where Anne Boleyn is, and quite a number of really big, and I always walk around the buildings and I talk to the staff, and I say, you know, how long have you been here? Most of them are volunteers. And I say, how long have you been in here? You know, do you know the ghost stories? Have you had any experiences? And you learn so much more. And in some instances, especially with this COVID around now, some of these really big houses are really struggling for money. So, you know, if you say to them, look, I'm a bona fide paranormal investigator. I'm not a commercial man making it for money. Could I come in here and do an investigation? I'll happily give you £100 to come in for the night, and you can happily have somebody with me. I carry £5 million worth of public liability insurance. You know, a lot of them are saying, well, okay. Museums are starting to do that now, and obviously you get into the world of things where the museum, the building itself isn't haunted, but the artifacts in them are possibly haunted. So, you know, that's another area. But you've got to the stage now where some of the really big commercial groups, and I've got nothing against commercial groups, but people like your Fright Nights and that, they're so big that they're able to go into places like Hinchinbrook House and pay £1,200, take 40, 60 people in there and actually make a profit. But I do wonder sometimes how much activity goes on and gets missed because the people are either inexperienced or there's so many of them there that it's missed, and they're inexperienced and they don't realise that what they've actually witnessed may well be paranormal. So to the likes of a little group like me, I've got my little team is about 14. That we very rarely go on an investigation where all of us are there. Normally it can be from anything between 4 of us to 12. Normally we don't very often have more than 12, and if we get 12, we'll normally split into 2 groups of 6. Building enough where I can do a plan that they'll be in this half of the building while I'm in this half, and when we move around, we don't talk about the building, the room we've already been in. We don't discuss that with the other group until the debrief at the end. And while you're doing your vigils, you conduct a number of paranormal experiments, from calling out, dowsing, crystals, glasswork, whatever, table tipping if you want to, and basically see what you get, really. And I think you just have to go with an open mind and be prepared to try more or less next to anything, really. But as I said, 50% of the time, I reckon you'll get nothing, based on my experience.
Oh, you do. You know, you can sell it. I mean, as you say, talking to people is the best way. We can look up, you know, we can Google, all we do. We Google information, we read stuff. With Greatfriars, to be honest, we're lucky enough to be close to Jamie Christopher, who's works with us. You know, he worked with us in The Darkest Mile, and we've got other stuff planning with Jamie. He's the manager of City of the Dead Tours, probably the biggest tour company in Edinburgh, and they do the tours in the prison, Greatfriars, and the Nidri Street South Vault. So
you see, what you have to remember as well, Scott, is that, you know, there's industries here. You know, these are tour companies. That's what they do. So there are people there who don't have any interest in paranormal investigating like you and I do, but they're still intrigued because it's history and it's something that can't be explained. And so the natural allure of the paranormal is there in everybody. But I think it's a subject that even if your best friend who you trust with your life came and told you that he'd just seen a ghost, you'd still want, take a bit of convincing, because that's the nature of, unless you actually have experienced it yourself, there's always an element of doubt. And you have to respect that in people, because obviously there are people about, like this guy I was telling you, who are just con men, and they want you to believe something is haunted because they want you to pay them money to go and visit it, and that's their incentive, really. So they're not going to tell you it's not haunted if they want to take your money, are they?
They want your hand in your pocket, basically, and that's the sad thing about it. But I think we'll wind it up there for now, and but we'll certainly get you back, Mark. I spoke to you the other night about doing a regular slot, if you're still interested in that, buddy.
If people, as I said, I've been doing it a long time, and I'm quite comfortable talking about the paranormal. I tell people as it is, you'll know that when you read my book. And I generally, I've got quite a lot of stories. Some of them, sometimes I've gone on investigations and nothing has happened, but I've still had a great time, because I'll give you an example. Just up the road from me is a place called Buxton Towers. People perhaps Google that when this is finished, and they'll have a look at the building. It looks something out of a Harry Potter film. And Catherine of Aragon was there. There's a beautiful knot garden there. And I spend the night in there, and I was sitting in the knot garden at 2 in the morning. Nothing really was happening. It was a beautiful moonlit night and summer's night, nice and warm. And I sort of sat there and I thought, Catherine of Aragon sat in here and made lace. And that to me was just wonderful, that I was sitting where she was 400 years ago, 500 years ago. And, I was sitting there, nothing paranormal was going on, but I still really enjoyed it. Even though I couldn't say while I sat there that I experienced anything that in any way was paranormal, but it was just a pleasure to be where somebody who's so famous had been and sat there making lace,
That's it. It's, I can relate to that as well. I've been to the Tower of London a few times. I've been to Hampton Court Palace. We're going back there in September for a private investigation, which you're welcome to come along to, Mark.
I'd love to. I'd love to, definitely.
And just to stand there at Hampton Court Palace thinking, this is Henry VIII. He probably threw this archway and stood there.
It's amazing history. The thing, do you remember I told you about 20 years ago, I was very privileged to get a sort of one-to-one tour. And the thing that impressed me the most, the tour started in the daylight. And then in the evening, we went to the haunted staircase and the various parts of the site that have got alleged hauntings attached to them. But the thing that blew my mind most of all was the guy took me up on the roof. And if you can go onto YouTube and see if you can find Hampton Court roof view, and you just stand up there and look around, it's absolutely stunning. This was in daylight. It's absolutely stunning. And the gardens around it, the grapevine there, everything about it. And when I got that tour, I never witnessed anything on it was paranormal, but to walk, on that staircase and to have my photo taken on the staircase. 2 years ago, the Huntingdonshire, they run a festival in July. It hasn't happened this year. It's not going to happen this year because of COVID. Didn't happen last year because of COVID, but they run a history festival, and I get asked to go along and do ghost walks and stuff like that, which I do. I'm going to be doing a load of them this year to try and raise some money for the festival to keep going, because all their events are basically free of charge, 90% of them free of charge. And I went in the Cromwell Museum and I handled the gunpowder flask that Cromwell used. It was his own personal ceramic gunpowder flask. I held one of his swords, albeit with a snooker player referee's white gloves on, but I was able to hold it. And I thought, wow, I'm holding something that Oliver Cromwell would have wielded in battle. What he, would have tipped gunpowder into his musket when he was hunting or fighting. He would have used this, and I'm holding it in my hand. I can send you photos of those if you'd like me to.
Please do. It's just one more place. Just when we talk about Hampton Court Palace, I knew there was something I had to ask you just before we finish it up. I was talking to Thomas Broad last night and one of your team members, Justin, And we were talking about Hampton Court. You know, we're talking. Thomas is a big Tudors fan, same as us. And we're talking about Richmond Park,
Yes.
which is nearby
Yes.
Hampton
Yeah.
Court, and
Yes.
we started to think, well, maybe we all know Henry was a great, you know, one of his biggest passion was hunting.
Yeah.
And we were wondering, I wonder if that's where he actually hunted. You know, obviously it will look a lot different now.
Yeah.
To back then.
I think it's highly likely, Scott. You know, that was, you know, what we consider the Premier League today. In their day, hunting was the same as, you know, your average Brit likes his football or whatever he likes. That was, you know, a pastime, and it was one that was not only enjoyed, but obviously it put meat on the table. So that's why King James I constantly visited Hinchinbrook, to the point where the Cromwells were spending so much money trying to lavish the king that they actually ran out of it and had to sell the place. But one thing I will just say before I go, which might be useful, my book has a website. If you just Google Huntingdonshire Paranormal Mark Egerton or something, there's a Weebly website. And if they have a look at the book's website, there are lots of pictures of places like Kimbolton Castle and pictures that appear in the book. And I think people will see how especially if you look at it, not so much on a phone, look on it on a PC screen where you can get a really big picture. And, you know, it's in the same class as places like Hampton Court. Buxton Towers, it's 2 miles from me up the road, and you'll see it. It's a fantastic building. So much history. The guest list there is just unbelievable. It just reads like a who's who.
I mean, there's loads of places. Winking Hall is on Sarah's list. It's on my list as well, to investigate. But I'd like to bring you back on, because you know, it's loads more to talk about. But for everybody who missed the start, this is Mark's book, the Haunted History of Huntingdonshire.
It's a mouthful.
It's a bit of a mouthful. But I managed it again. I'm quite happy with that. It's absolutely loaded, as you can see, with stories and photographs. It's absolutely amazing. Mark kindly sent me this free of charge, and I'm Scottish, so I was quite glad to get a freebie, as all this Scottish stuff. You know. But
can I just say, Scott, the book is only available in the Kindle format on Amazon at the moment, but the hard copies are just about sold out everywhere. So I'm having another print run done, and when that print run is done, I'm going to put the hard copy on Amazon as well. You can get a hard copy from the publisher. You can get a hard copy from me if anybody wants a hard copy. There aren't many of them around at the moment, but we've just had another 1,000 book print run printed. And if anybody wants to contact me because they want a copy, I've sent loads to America. And to give you an idea of the size of the book sells for $24.99. It costs another 20 quid to send it to America because it's such a big, heavy book, and people have paid it. So I figured if I got it on Amazon, then they've got their Amazon Prime. All they'll have to pay is the cost of the book, not the excessive postage charges to get it. Well, you've got it in your hands, Scott. It's heavy, isn't it?
It's a fair. As I say, when it arrived, I expected the postman to chat my door, but for some reason, he put it through the letterbox. That's the envelope it came in there. And I was in the bedroom, and I just heard this almighty thud. And I thought, what the beep's that? And I went out of the hall, and that was sitting in the hall. I says, he's shoved that through the letterbox. So no, it is. There's a fair waiter, and it's absolutely loaded. And I'm going to.
If there's anybody out there who's local to Huntingdonshire, Cambridgeshire, you don't have to buy it. It's available in all the libraries. The libraries, I think, Cambridgeshire Libraries bought about 30 copies. So all of the Cambridgeshire's a big county. All of the libraries, certainly the Huntingdonshire libraries, they all stock it. So if you're local and you wanted to read it, you don't have to buy it. The Kindle is about £5. Personally, I don't like the Kindle. Amazon play around with it, and it's got a few little quirky errors, which are really where they've loaded it digitally. And I'm not a fan of the Kindle personally. I like to have that book in my hand. And I found that when most people have picked it up and looked at it, they buy it. The Kindle, the Kindle's the same book, obviously, and it's got the same things in it, but I think the book is more impressive. That's just my personal opinion. But if you are local, if you're local here, you can get it out of the library for nothing.
I totally agree with 110%, Mark. It's a beautiful book, and the way it's been put together as well. But I prefer a book. You know, don't get me wrong. I read Google and, you know, all sorts of stuff, but you can't beat a book, as they say. You know,
no.
As my gran used to say.
I can read a book in the bath. I'm a bit wary about me iPad in the bath, but I can sit there with a book and soak and read the book at the same time. I'd
be scared in case I dropped it in. Know what I mean?
Well, I must admit I am careful, but when it's your own book, it doesn't matter. You can get another copy.
You just reach over, don't you? I'll get another one. Then. So I'll keep a hold of you for a wee minute or two after we come off, Mark. So don't disappear on me, please.
Okay. Right.
But we'll wind it up there for tonight, folks. So thanks very much for coming in. You will be seeing Mark again very soon. I hope you all enjoy it. Fascinating guy. He definitely knows his stuff. We'll put his websites and that up on our Facebook page for you to get in his websites. His Facebook page is on our Facebook page. I know what I meant. I know what I was talking about.
Yeah, I would say that the Facebook pages will show you a lot of the pictures. The page that's dedicated to the book is all Huntingdonshire, but the other one called Haunted Histories is all around the UK, including Scotland. The website, if you can find the book's website, it's a Weebly site. There's some fantastic buildings on there that are worth looking at on a PC screen rather than your phone, where phone doesn't really do them justice. iPads are not bad, but a phone is not great. You can't see the majesty of the buildings.
Yeah. But you'll definitely be seeing Mark back more than once, I hope. Hint, hint, fingers crossed. So that's it for tonight, folks. We're back Monday night with Karen Perkins on a monthly Karen's Book Corner. That's at 9 o'clock. And till I stay, enjoy the rest of the weekend. I hope the weather's nice and shiny and warm like it was up here. And we'll see you on Monday. So I'll just keep hold of you for a wee second or two, Mark.
Okay, Scott.
So take care, folks, and we'll see you all soon. Bye for now.